All right, we have Shrek the Halls, a Christmas special for Shrek. Wow, never thought I would see the day. So, this came out around like 2007, so like when Shrek the Third, I think, just came out. So they were going, okay, well, we've now hit this point with Shrek where we could potentially do something more with it other than just these movies. And they said, all right, how about doing like a Christmas special, and then later on they would do a Halloween special. And I was like, all right, that works. And because, they were rerunning a lot of those specials around the holidays. And so they're like, all right, DreamWorks said, hey, we don't have one. Let's do one for Shrek. And then eventually they made one for like Monsters versus Aliens, but haven't seen that and don't really care to because I didn't even really care about the movie. But that's just me. And so when it comes to, Shrek the Halls, even though it came out the same year as Shrek the Third, I actually think that this is better than 3 and 4. So, yeesh. 3, I just have a little nostalgia for because I saw that a lot when I was a kid. But 4, I remember very little. Because I was like, this is just kind of middle of the road. But then we had this. So, Shrek the Halls, this is about, Shrek, he's very much like, I don't celebrate the holidays because ogres don't know what the hell holidays are until, Donkey and Fiona are just like, oh no, we need to celebrate Christmas. And he's like, doesn't want to tell them doesn't want to tell Fiona that, like, I don't know what the holidays are. Like, what the hell are that? So he gets a book called Christmas for Village Idiots, which I think is kind of funny. But I like the way that they go with this because it does fit the half-hour format. If you take this and make it into a movie, they would have to stretch this thing out and it wouldn't work. So I think a story like this worked for a half-hour format. And I also think it's actually pretty funny. Like, I rewatched this not too long ago, and I was like, wow, some of this is actually still funny. Like, I like the moments where they're telling their own versions of 'Twas the Night Before Christmas story. And I like how Donkeys was just dumb as hell. And just like, but there were some parts in there where I was like, okay, that actually got a chuckle out of me. Where, like a giant turkey just gets up and starts dancing to CC Music Factory. I was like, okay, that's kind of funny. And then you have Puss in Boots, who I love how they basically told his like he was Zorro, and it was funny because it was Antonio Banderas. So I thought that was pretty funny. But the one that got the most laughs out of me was Gingy, where his was just a horror movie. And I found that really funny. So this has some moments in there. Like I said, I actually preferred this over most of 3, but actually all of 4. Because like I said, 3 has its moments. It's not great. It's not in the same quality as 1 and 2, but it has its moments. And then 4, I just really don't remember. I was like, yeah, even when I saw it, I was like, this is just kind of boring. So we have this, and I like actually the way they played this out and the way they did this. Because you have you have the storyline of Shrek wanting to impress his family, even though he knows jack and shit about the holidays. But you also got him struggling because Donkey shows up with everybody and just kind of does what a little bit what Donkey does, over exaggerate things. But at the same time, Shrek is just following a certain code and not realizing that the code doesn't need to be set in stone. It's not set in stone. And so, he's learning new things here and there. And so it was really kind of nice to see that. And I think because everybody comes back. You have Myers come back, Murphy comes back, Diaz comes back, Banderas comes back. So they all come back, and I think they do a really good job, even for something like a special like this, like a half-hour special where they honestly could have probably just half-assed it. They didn't, because I do think DreamWorks, they have really talented writers when it fits with what they're doing. Because this was around when, when Shrek the Third came out, and it was just like, yeah, a lot of these are just kind of just little lame jokes. And then every once in a while in that one, they caught you something off guard. It wasn't like something like 2, where they have their own, parody show of cops. And it was like, okay, that's actually pretty funny. And so with DreamWorks, I felt like when it came to like 2000 stuff, like especially after stuff like Shrek 2, but then when stuff started coming out like Monsters vs. Aliens, and I was like, yeah, I like the premise of this, but this is still kind of just meh. But then it wasn't until like How to Train Your Dragon came out, and it was like, see, this is how you do it. This is how you do it. But then they just started doing more stuff that was just like, okay, this is just kind of whatever. But then, luckily Puss in Boots and the second one came out, and it was like, see, you guys got this. So DreamWorks has always been kind of like, I've always seen them as kind of style over substance in many cases, where I think if they can find a good balance, like something like Puss in Boots 2 or the How to Train Your Dragon movies, they can really knock it out of the park. But when you have something like Trolls, where it's just like, okay, both of this is just very just meh. It's I think they've gotten better, but it's in like little increments. So for something like this, where it was like, all right, this is their first special, I think for the most part, they did a pretty good job. There's still some parts in there where I'm like, okay, this didn't really land. But I think if they did stretch this out, if they did make this a movie, like an hour and a half movie, they would have had to stretch this thing out like crazy, and it just wouldn't make sense. Its balance would be off, its pacing would be off. So they understood, like, okay, we need to make this a special. We need to make this half hour, and it works. So I like that, everybody, for something that they could have easily probably just like I said, just half-assed. I think probably they were filming this at the same time they were doing Shrek 3rd. So they were just like, all right, you finish your lines for the third movie. How about do these lines for the special real quick? And they just went, all right, let's do it. And so they just did it. So personally, I liked this one. I give it a great, actually. It's something where it's like, I'd watch this special every year, much like Charlie Brown one. I'm like, yeah, I'd watch that every year. This is kind of up there. So, good job. Good job, DreamWorks. And especially for it being, I think, their first special, or maybe one of their first ones. It was like, all right, you guys can do this. And it doesn't really seem like they're doing that anymore these days. It seems like Universal or Illumination is doing that, which honestly I don't really care. But because I've always thought DreamWorks was better than Illumination. But, oh well.